All right, I want to move along here. I want to talk to you. Actually, I'm going to be talking to you about some myths that are connected to Christmas. But first, I want to talk to you about some interesting Christmas facts. Actually, I put the word possible interesting facts, because things that I think are interesting, not everybody thinks are interesting. Because my mind is off sometimes. So, for example, on November 17th, Reader's Digest came out and they were pinging off of a money.cnn.com article about Reader's Digest on November 17th, that the number one book that's stolen, the most shoplifted book in the United States is the Bible. And I thought that was interesting. Now, not everybody thinks that's interesting, but I thought it was interesting. And all that to say that I find things interesting. Another thing, what I find interesting, another weird thing, is I find what's interesting is when people with English accents start to talk and be intelligent, I believe them no matter what they're saying. It just seems like they could be saying, you know, if you eat apples with apple seeds, an apple tree will grow out of your belly button. And I would go, yeah, it sounds about right. And what's interesting about that is, here's my thought on that. With an American accent, if I go to England, I'll sound intelligent. So I'm going to give that a try, just to see if that works in reverse. But all that to say that some things that I think are interesting are not that interesting to other people. So we're going to dive in and just check some things. Then I'm going to get into some myths. All right. So here's number one. Three possibly interesting facts about Christmas. Number one is why celebrate it on December 25th. And it's not because of the winter solstice. That actually happens tomorrow, December 21st. So it's not because of that. And then others thought that, Christmas is a pagan ripoff because it's thought that Christians took over the pagan holiday of Sol Invictus, which means unconquered sun, which happens on December 25th. But there's no evidence, very little evidence for that. So that's not why we celebrate Christmas on December 25th. So here's why. At the time, culture kind of settled on December 25th. I don't know where they got this. I could have probably Googled it and went deep on this, but I didn't feel like it. But they thought that the day that a person died, the date of the month and date was that they died, was the same month or was the same date on the calendar that they were conceived, all right? Or the same month and date. So what they said was, they actually thought, and I think they were pretty close on this, is that Jesus was crucified on March 25th. So here's what it would look like. A timeline is that if he was born on March 25th, if you go 9 months, therefore he was born on December 25th. Because you were conceived the same month and day that you died, is what they thought. So they just backed it up, went 9 months, and then they went forward to December 25th on the day that he must have been born. And that's how they got it. Now, was that right? No. But that's what they got, and that's why we celebrate it. It's part of how it got going, just the way it is. Another fact is we talk about, of course, is the Christmas tree. And the first documented Christmas trees came from Christians in 1441. That's a long time ago in Estonia. A little bit later in 1510 in Latvia. But the reason they settled up on a tree is because it comes from Exodus chapter 15. Of course, you all remember the story, of course. But that was the bitter waters of Marah. And it was, they've been out in the wilderness. They came to this place called Marah. And they were grumbling that they didn't have water. So God said, take this tree, throw it into the water. And when the tree went into the water, it turned the bitter water sweet. And the Christmas tree, therefore, is representative, symbolizes what Jesus did for us with His birth. He had turned our bitter water sweet. We went from condemnation to redemption. And that's what the tree represents. Another one is the candy cane. And you can kind of figure this one out, is that it's shaped like a shepherd's crook. And why is that? Because 1 Peter 5:4 says Jesus is the chief shepherd. So the origin of candy canes is directly connected to Jesus being a shepherd and our shepherd, chief shepherd. And there's all kinds of things. I could have gone into lots of other possibly interesting facts, but I decided that I don't want to do that. It's just three. Really, what I want to get to is right now is 6 Christmas myths. A little bit of busting the myths here. And this is not here we are at Christmas time. And what are you doing to us, Tom? You're killing us here. You're going to start exploding stuff that we're so dear to us, and we're singing Christmas carols in a certain way with certain stuff, and now you're going into this. So, but this is not to cause anyone angst or distress or things like that. It's just for the sake of truth, and sometimes it's just good to get into the actual truth of the Christmas story, and that's what we're doing today. So let me start in. Myth number 1 is there was a star the night Jesus was born. That is a myth. Every Christmas card from Hallmark and this, that, and the other shows the stable and the star shining above the stable and all that kind of stuff, but that actually did not happen. There was no star the night Jesus was born. Now, I'll wait for you to jumpstart your pacemakers, and then we'll continue. But in Luke chapter 2, it says this, and this is to the shepherds. He's speaking to the shepherds. The angel appears, and they're singing, and he appears to them, all these shepherds going. But I'm jumping down a little bit. Today, in the city of David, a Savior was born to you. Today, it's that day. It's that day. Now, they were out at night, so, that day, that night. Born for you, who is the Messiah, the Lord, there will be a sign for you. And the sign wasn't a star. That's what I want you to notice here. It didn't say anything about a star. It said, you will find a baby wrapped tightly in cloth and lying in a manger. When the angels had left them and returned to heaven, the shepherds said to one another, let's go straight to Bethlehem and see what has happened, which the Lord has made known to us. They hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in the manger. So they weren't told to look for a star. The star wasn't given to the shepherds. The star was given to the Magi. And that's the difference, all right? No, their only thing is they hurried off and got to where Jesus was lying and found the baby as told. Now, let me give you a timeline kind of how this goes. And I don't know if you can all see this. It's kind of small, but I hope you can see it. So you start off with the birth of Jesus Christ on the left part of this timeline. Angels visit the shepherds. Shepherds visit Jesus. That's what happens when he's born. Now, that happened on that day, today, in the city of David. All right? And then at the very same time Jesus is born, the Magi see the star, and they begin their journey westward, they begin their journey westward towards Jerusalem because they had been shown that the Messiah, the King of the Jews, was born. So they start their trek, their journey, and so the star appeared to the Magi, but not to the shepherds. And so probably by the time they got to Jerusalem was around 1 month. From Babylon, I'll get into this in just a second, Babylon or east to Jerusalem, about 500 miles. And it would have taken them with a caravan about a month to get there. Not 2 years, although Herod, had the babies killed from 2 years and back, but that was just to be safe. It probably took them about a month to get there. Now, after a month, then it says of them, they entering the house, they saw the child, Matthew 2:11. So this is the Magi now, not the shepherds. And that's where the star comes in. And so the Magi go to Jerusalem and then eventually to Bethlehem. And it says in Matthew 2:1, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Then it goes on with the wise men. So this is probably a month after. So there was no star over Joseph and Mary and Jesus with the shepherds the day Jesus was born. And I apologize for that. But let's go on. Myth number 2. Myth number 2 was there were three wise men. Now, in both art and song, we three kings of Orient, we get the impression that there's three wise men, which are called magi, all right? But that is nowhere in the Bible. There's nowhere in the Bible that says there was three wise men. Now, let's go into it. Matthew 2:1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem. It doesn't say how many of them there were. Now let me show you where people think there was 3, and this is where you get it from, is Matthew 2:11. Says, entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and falling to their knees, they worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So there's 3 gifts, so there obviously had to be 3 different people. No, the Magi did this because the Magi, there was 3 of them, but that doesn't mean there was just, or 3 gifts, doesn't mean there's 3 Magi or wise men. That's not logical. Actually, the Magi, it's interesting, probably brought these gifts. They either brought it because they were aware of this prophecy, or they weren't aware of this prophecy, but fulfilled the prophecy unknowingly, is from Isaiah chapter 60 and verse 3 and 6. This chapter is talking about the coming Messiah to the Gentiles. And it says, nations will come to your light, kings to your shining brightness. Caravans of camels will cover your land, young camels of Midian and Ephah. All of them will come from Sheba. They will carry what? Gold and frankincense, and proclaim the praises of the Lord, which is exactly what the Magi did. So that's probably what was, either they were knowingly or unknowingly fulfilling Isaiah chapter 60, and that's where that happened. But it doesn't say that there's only 3 of them. You see, I have 2 kids and their spouses, and this Christmas they gave me 1 gift, sadly. And so 1 gift doesn't mean I only had 1. Collectively they gave that. So, it just doesn't mean, in other words, number of gifts does not equal number of people. And yet we throw that into the story. It's not the greatest thinking. It's just not true. History tells us that Magi traveled in larger groups. In fact, in 66 AD, 1,000 of them went up to see Nero in Rome. They traveled generally in groups of 50. We don't know how many there were, but there probably wasn't 3. All right, that was myth number 2. Still all right? It's still Christmas time. We're still happy, cheerful. Myth number 3 is there was no room for them at the inn. No room for them at the inn. We teach that they were turned away. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph were turned away from the innkeeper because there was no room for them at the inn. That's just not true. Well, yes, it is, Tom. Luke 2:7. So here's Luke 2:7, New King James Version. And she brought forth her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. See right there, big boy? It says inn. But actually, the best translation of the Greek word is not inn. It's place to stay. Now, I looked up, I did some studying. There's a great article, very in-depth article by Stephen C. Carlson, Duke University. It's called The Accommodations of Mary and Joseph in Bethlehem, Luke 2:7. And he goes on to say that Greek word doesn't mean inn at all. It means just a place to stay, all right? Now, this is a different word, inn, that's used here. It's only used in the King James. That's a different Greek word than's used, for example, in the parable of the Good Samaritan. If you remember the parable of the Good Samaritan, he brings the Samaritan, puts him on a donkey or something, brings him to the inn. Now, that inn was a real inn, but that's a different Greek word. Here, it just simply means there was no place for him, not enough room for him to stay. All right? And remember, they went back to Bethlehem because of the census. Joseph was from Bethlehem. They had to go there to the city of his birth. So he comes into Bethlehem, and they most likely stayed at a house of a relative. His family, extended family, were there in Bethlehem. But the thing about houses back then is they had a small guest room. Houses back then in Bethlehem had a small guest room to the side, and evidently that was filled up with somebody. There was just no room for them in that little spare bedroom that these houses had to the side. So no innkeeper, no inn is mentioned there. They weren't denied room, but there just wasn't room in that spare little bedroom. What's mentioned here is that Mary gave birth and laid him in a manger. And I'll get to that now. Well, let's go on. Number 4 is that Jesus was born in a barn or stable. And every Hallmark Christmas card has this. Every little cartoon, whatever you want to do, it has a stable or a barn, whatever you want. But Scripture doesn't say that Jesus was born in a barn or a stable, only that they laid him in a manger. Now, a manger is a feeding trough. And something they have in Israel more than they have wood is rocks. I've been to Israel 5 different times, a lot of rocks. Most likely these, and you're looking at an ancient Near East feeding trough, most likely the manger or feeding trough for the food of an animal was carved out of rock because wood was kind of precious, it was kind of scarce, all right? So more likely there was not this beautiful carpentry-made manger with hay in it, all right? Most likely it was one of these types of mangers, and Mary placed him in there wrapped up in all kinds of clothes so it'd be comfortable in this little side bedroom. What was common in that area was they had another side room. This was common, and this is probably what happened. They had another side room that had a manger, one of those rascals there that we see in the picture. And that manger was in a little side protected room for the lambs, for the little newborn lambs and their moms, right after they were born, to keep them from the cold. Most likely, because there was no room in the main guest room of that house, there was this other small room that had a manger where the little newborn lambs would be, and that's probably where they stayed, at least for the first couple nights. So that was what was common. Luke 2:12. This will be a sign for you. You will find the baby wrapped up in tightly in cloth, and lying in a manger. So when the shepherds visited the newborn on that night, it wasn't a barn or a stable. It was probably a house side room with that type of a manger in the spare room that they used just for the newborn sheep. Anyhow, moving on. Number 5 myth is the star wasn't actually. Actually, the myth is that it was a star, but actually the star wasn't. I worded that wrong. The star actually wasn't a star. The star wasn't actually a star. So the myth should have been called here, there was an actual star. Actually, it wasn't a star. And this is where we kind of get into some things about a little bit technical in nature. But I found out you're very technical people and love this kind of stuff. You find it very interesting. Just like me, I find it interesting. Therefore, you find it interesting. Matthew chapter 2 and verse 2. Where is he who is born King of the Jews? For we saw his star. Well, there it says right there, big boy. Star, what are you talking about? Star, and it's rising. I want you to see that word, rising, and have come to worship him. 2 things here that are important. The word star here doesn't mean a star as we know it. Strong's Concordance simply says this, the word star here. There you go. Go back. Star here means, from Strong's Concordance, probably a star, but strewn across the sky. Strewn across. It's not just like a pinpoint star out there. It was like across. Strewn. That's exactly what Strong's Concordance or Definite Dictionary says about it. Secondly, you'll notice the word rising. Now that's key because it's moving, and that's what the Magi are keying up on. It's not stationary, it had movement. So if it wasn't a star, what was it that was strewn across the sky? And here is what I believe it was. There's a book called The Great Christ Comet, Revealing the True Star of Bethlehem by Colin Nichol. I meant to bring that book. It was right on my counter. I forgot to bring it. I forgot to bring the book, so you know that I somewhat know what I'm talking about. Somewhat. But I have that book. In fact, that book came out in 2015, about October 2015, and I ordered this book before it ever came out in print. In other words, I pre-ordered it because I was fascinated by it. This guy's a theologian, but he also went to astronomers. And so this book is the merging of Scripture with science to look at the Star of Bethlehem. That's what it is. Now, being a theologian, he went to the footnotes and the bibliography in this book are extensive. The footnotes and everything are just incredible. He went to numerous reputable, big-name astronomers and scholars to find out about the trajectory of comets, this, that, and the other. And there's actually software you can get. There's software you can get that you can run back to any date you want, and it'll show you what's happening in the sky that day. Not only that day, that time. You can go back to your birthday with this software and see what the sky looked like. You can go back to 1776. You can go back anywhere you want. So and it's very scientific. It's accurate. You run it right back. His whole book is about this comet, what he's calling the Great Christ Comet, and he traces what happened back when Jesus was born. So the wording, the timing, combining Scripture with science, it's called the Great Comet. It's obvious from Matthew's account that the Magi knew there was a sign in the sky and it meant something and it portrayed the birth of the Jewish Messiah. So how did that happen? The Magi, out in the east, they see this constellation, something happening, and they deduce right away that the Jewish king has been born, and they start journeying towards Jerusalem. And it signified the Jewish Messiah being born. So this is what they said. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star, which I'm saying scientifically was a comet, and it's rising, because it moved night after night, and have come to worship him. So the Magi were an interesting gang. They were very intelligent, cultured. They were involved with astrology, which is a no-no, but they were also involved with astronomy. There's a difference between astronomy and astrology. But they were experts. They were experts at looking at the sky. And they were most likely, the evidence is in Babylon. Now, was anybody else in Babylon? Who? Jews. Jews were exiled to where? Babylon. And so you have thousands and thousands and thousands of Jews being exiled to Babylon for how many years? 70. Now, a lot of them come back, but not all of them do. Thousands of them stay back in Babylon. Remember, it's 70 years. They bring up their kids there. They're young. They bring up their kids there. I don't want to go back. And we're happy. We're fat, dumb, and happy here in Babylon. We don't want to go back to Jerusalem, so they don't. Thousands stayed in Babylon, intelligent people. And this is most likely where the Magi learned from the Jews in Babylon, the rabbis and teachers, about these prophecies. They were schooled in this stuff, and they connected with the Jews there. So here, they see this thing in the sky, a comet thing, that portrays a coming Messiah. Where did they get that from? From the Jews. So they learned about this prophecy from Numbers 24, verse 16 and 7. This is from the prophet Balaam, a seer, a prophet. And Numbers 24, 16 and 7, the oracle of one who hears the sayings of God and has knowledge from the Most High. In other words, I'm speaking this from God. Who sees a vision from the Almighty, and this is what he sees. Who falls into a trance with his eyes uncovered. In other words, he doesn't have his eyes closed. This is a full-blown realistic trance or vision. I see him, but not now. What does that mean? I see him, but he's not present on the earth right this second. I perceive him, but not near. He's off in the future, is what this prophecy is saying. And what is he saying? A star will come, and the Septuagint, which is the Greek rendering of the Old Testament, says a star will rise. That's what it literally says. A star will rise from Jacob, and a scepter will arise from Israel. So these Magi are pinging off of this stuff that they're learning from the Jews who were in Babylon. This prophecy was about the coming Messiah. Numbers 24 is talking about the coming Messiah and its star rising. They're putting two and two together. And so that comet pinpointed like a straight line right over the house in the final analysis, like a visible scepter, a straight staff that the king would use, a visible scepter as they're coming from Jerusalem, turning south to Bethany. I've done that trip, coming to Bethany, and that comet on that night, at that time, in that evening, a straight line comet like a scepter was pointing right to the house where Jesus and Mary and Joseph were. So it wasn't a star, it was a comet. Now, how are you going to prove this? You know, it's debatable. It's debatable. But the science in that book, you're going to have to undo a lot of science that shows exactly what was happening in the sky that night. Number 6, Jesus was born on December 25th. Now, we talked about December 25th earlier, but he wasn't born on December 25th. Again, from that book, The Great Christ Comet by Colin Nichol. We can scientifically trace back through science exactly what was happening, and I'll just give you the bottom line. The birth of Jesus was most likely born on October 20th, 6 BC. Well, how can it be 6 BC? First of all, there's no 0 BC. There's no positive 0. You can't have a positive. There's no 0. You skip from -1 to +1 immediately. History tells us that Herod died in 4 BC. All right? Herod died in 4 BC, but this is the same Herod that commanded, you talked with the Magi and commanded that the babies be born, the babies that were in Bethlehem, rather, be killed from 2 years under, 2 years old and under. So if that happened earlier, if all of this happened earlier than 4 BC, 2 years, Jesus was born, and that's what the science shows, he was born in 6 BC on October 20th. All right, let me talk about this a little bit more. The Magi were experts at discerning things, looking at the constellations and discerning what was happening. We don't. We certainly don't. I don't. Maybe you do. But they did. It doesn't matter what you did. It matters what they did, and they were experts at it. So the constellations were put there up in the sky by God. Did you know that? To communicate truth. The stars, the constellations. You think that the 12 signs of constellations in the star, they're probably new like from 1800 on. No, thousands of years they've known about this and called them by those names. Thousands of years. They were put there by God to communicate truth, not astrology, astronomy. And here's what it says in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 14. The lights in the sky will be for signs. Excuse me. It says the lights in the sky, all those, what's happening there, shall be for signs. And I'm pinging off of the interesting book called The Witness of the Stars by E.W. Bullinger, which talks about God communicating through the constellations and what's happening, communicating truth, His truth, through those things. It's just so interesting. Listen, the devil didn't create constellations. God did. It says so. God created them to communicate with us. Let me give you an example. Here's Sagittarius, which is the archer. And then if you trace the trajectory of Sagittarius, the archer's bow and arrow, the arrow goes straight out and kills Scorpio, or Scorpius. Now, what is God communicating here? Luke 10:19, you shall tread on scorpions. So God's communicating with us. The archer goes and kills scorpion. You say, well, I mean, that's just how God communicates. Now, as the Magi look, that's just an example. As the Magi look at the night sky, they're studying, and they notice the constellation Virgo, and something happening. So we have another constellation called Virgo, which is the Virgin. The Virgin. And so it's a constellation up in the sky. The Magi, getting info from the Jews in Babylon, know the prophecy. They know the prophecy, Isaiah 7:14. The Lord Himself will give you what? A sign. And there it is. See, the virgin will conceive, have a son, and name him Emmanuel. So here's what, now this is embellished, but you get the idea. Here's October 12th through the 15th of what's happening in the sky with Virgo the Virgin. Kind of comes up initially from September 30th but then the baby drops, just like drops in real life, within the constellation Virgo, and this is what the Magi are keying up on. It starts to drop, and you go through various, you can go back to that one, it goes through the various October 6th, 12th, 15th, it starts to really drop from the 15th on, right down to the 20th, when the baby, the comet, what they call the coma, the large round part of the comet is there in Virgo, and it comes out on October 20th. Now we see the labor coming down out of Virgo, the big comet, the main part of the comet within Virgo starting to come down, and then the delivery is on October 20th, 6 BC. Now, at the same time, what makes this interesting, possibly interesting, I should say, what makes this possibly interesting is that at this very same time that the baby is coming out from Virgo and the birth of Jesus Christ is happening, at the very same time in the skies, Genesis 1:14, they're given to communicate what's happening here is the constellation Hydra, which is a snake or dragon. That's one of the constellations. Anybody ever heard of it other than me? No? But you have this constellation called Hydra, which is a snake or dragon. Now here's a graphic depiction of Hydra with what happens. On the left there's the depiction, but on the right is the in the stars. What happened when Jesus was born in the constellation Hydra? There was, they can prove it scientifically, a meteor shower where all these stars were falling from Hydra and hurled to earth at the same time. Of course, we know that the dragon or the serpent is who? The devil, yeah. So the very night that Jesus is getting born, or that evening, this meteor shower is falling from Hydra, the scorpion, or the snake. Well, what's the big deal? Here's the big deal. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 3 and 4. This is Revelation 12, 3 and 4. Then another sign appeared in heaven. There was a great fiery dragon. Its tail swept away a third of the stars in heaven and hurled them to the earth. And the dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she did give birth, it might devour the child. The Apostle John is looking back and seeing something that happened here, the moment that Jesus was born. And he sees these stars falling from heaven at the time that the dragon swipes it, trying to kill the child. He didn't kill the child, but he swipes a third of the stars, and they're hurled down to earth. That's exactly what happened with the constellation Hydra on the night that Jesus was born. It happened exactly that way, and the Magi are observing this. All right. Well, Tom, if the comet was something natural, like a comet, then it certainly wasn't supernatural. If it was natural, then no big deal. But you're failing to understand that if this happened, that means that 13.7 billion years ago, when the Big Bang happened, and I'm an old Earth guy, if you're a young Earth guy, then forgive me. But I think I'm an old Earth guy, and I believe the days in Genesis were probably 24-hour days, but they were separated by long portions of time. That means that at the Big Bang, 13.7 billion years ago, think deeply about this, drill down. That means 13.7 billion years ago, when the Big Bang happened, that God created a comet that would circle within our solar system for 13.7 billion years and came around at the exact time pointing over a house on October 20th, 6 BC, when Jesus was born, that led the Magi to that house as they traveled from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. I mean, it's just a supernatural thing in every single way. It's natural, but it's supernatural at the same time. The birth of Jesus Christ was a supernatural event. Supernatural in every way, every part of it. It was prophesied the Messiah would be born of a virgin in Bethlehem. It was supernatural when an angel visited Mary to announce that she would carry the Messiah in her womb. It was supernatural when Mary's cousin, Elizabeth, who was pregnant herself with John the Baptist, met the pregnant Mary, and the baby within Elizabeth, who was John the Baptist, leaped within her womb in the presence of Jesus. That's supernatural, friends. It was supernatural when Jesus was dedicated at the temple. A few days after he was born, and a man by the name of Simeon was told by the Lord that he would not die until he saw the Messiah, the Savior of the Messiah of Israel being revealed. And as soon as Simeon, they placed Jesus in the arms of Simeon in the temple. That was it. And Simeon rejoices, and all of a sudden he grabs the baby Jesus, and he says this in Luke 2, 29 to 32. Now, Master, talking to God, once he holds Jesus, now, Master, you can dismiss your servant in peace, as you promised. For my eyes have seen your salvation, your salvation. He's holding Israel's salvation in his arms. For my eyes have seen your salvation. You've prepared it in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and glory to your people Israel. That would have been radical when you said that about the Gentiles. Right after Simeon gives this prophecy and speaks out under the inspiration of God, Anna, a prophetess, a lady prophesying? Oh my. Anna, the prophetess, comes up. And it says that she spoke about the child to all who were looking forward to the redemption of Israel. Just like Simeon, she gets with the child and says, this baby is for the redemption. That's supernatural. It was supernatural that the great Christ comet came 13.7 billion years and landed above like a scepter, like a straight line scepter pointing over the house. It was supernatural that God warned the Magi not to go back to Herod, but go back to the east their own way in a different way. It was supernatural that God warned Joseph to get out of town of Bethlehem before the babies were killed. History tells us that there were about 20 to 40 babies that were killed in Bethlehem at that time with Herod. And Jesus was born exactly and precisely at the time he wanted, because Daniel 9 gives the exact day that Jesus was crucified. Daniel chapter 9 gives the exact day that Jesus was crucified. I ain't going to do that. And you back it up all that time, and Jesus was born at the right time. Do you think Jesus was born at the right time? Here's Galatians 4 and 5 NIV. But when the set time had fully come, there it is right there. When the set time had fully come, when the right moment had come, God sent His Son, born of a woman. That means of a virgin. Well, at the time, all people are born from a woman. All people are born from a woman. Why would it say that? Because it's talking about a virgin. Born of a woman, to redeem those who are under the law so that we might receive adoption to sonship. That's us. Why was Jesus born at a particular time in a very supernatural way? For your salvation. For my salvation. To bring us into the adoption of sons into God's family. That's not automatic. You got to be a Christ follower, not a Christ believer. There's lots of Christ believers, but they're not Christ followers. It's for Christ followers. Go ahead and stand. We'll pray. Close this thing up.